Well, thank you very much. Now it works. So 10 years ago, about 500 meters from here, I did something that I was even more nervous about than I am right now. I said yes to my wife, who's over there. Oh, no. I was supposed to say yes, that was just one single word, but I said, hell yeah! I hope I remember my words today a little bit better. So I'm not here to talk about my fantastic love life. I'm here to talk about the web. That the web is fantastic, and it's fantastic to create stuff for the web. And we came up with this weird title, Mediaqueryless Responsiveness, because it sounds cool. Okay, so I like creating stuff for the web. And I really like creating stuff for the web. And the reason why I like creating stuff for the web is because it is so flexible. Let me explain this to you, what I mean by this illustration. Some of you might recognize it. It's a beautiful illustration by Mike Guss. It was published in one of the books by Smashing Magazine. And I really liked it, my wife really liked it, and we had this very boring wall in our house, so we decided to paint this illustration onto our wall. Now this can be done, of course, and it's a lot of work, but after that it looks like this. Now, the developers amongst you might say, whoa, that looks good. But I see the designers among you say, ooh, those circles are too big. And indeed, they shouldn't be like this, they should be like this, right? So after I was done, there is no such thing as Control-Z in real life. So now I had to find my Illustrator files, make these stencils a little bit smaller, send them over to the laser cutter who lives on the other side of Amsterdam, ask my kids to please get off my car and stop drawing on it so I can drive to the laser cutter, pick up my stencils, and then draw every single circle back onto the wall again. Now, as you might understand, this is a lot of work. It took me about a month. It's there, we're very happy with it, but that was a lot of work, right? And then I sat down on the couch, or in my hammock, don't remember, somewhere. I just relaxed, and I thought, I have to thank Mike Guss in some way, because he made this illustration. I didn't really ask for his permission to draw this thing onto a wall. So I said, how can I thank him? And I decided to create a website to thank him with the illustration on it. And it looks like this. Now, the reason why I like the web so much is that let's just assume that this illustration is too big. Now, if we wanted to make this a little bit smaller, since I used the right unit here, M, the only thing I have to do is make the font size a little bit smaller and the whole illustration shrinks. This is something that is just native to the web. This is how the web works. It is supposed to be flexible. It is supposed to be easily adjustable, and I really, really like this. And the reason why this works is because it is that way by design. This is the famous tweet by Tim Berners-Lee, the person who invented the web, where he said, this is for everyone. It's not really that Twitter is for everyone, the web is for everyone. Well, this means something. So this is unique as well. I mean, books can be for everyone, but not everybody can use books. So if we create stuff for the web, the fact that it is there for everyone means that it has maybe different appearances, or possible different appearances. Now, one of the problems I had, you might know there are a few browsers that don't support border radius. There's an older one, the older people amongst you might remember that one. But what should this illustration look like on those browsers? Should it look like this? Well, I think it shouldn't look like this, right? Because it is an illustration of circles. It shouldn't look like rectangles. Now, usually I really don't care about rounded corners. Just make them rectangle on all the browsers. But in this particular case, I think it shouldn't look like this. So I decided that instead of making an illustration of squares, people with Opera Mini will get to see this. And the good thing is that now if they are maybe some very talented illustrators, they may even come up with a better illustration, right? And the best thing about this, I think, is that people with Internet Explorer, they can even make up the colors because Internet Explorer doesn't support HSL color notation. Now, what would be the most important thing I think about this one is that even people who need assistive technology can now listen to the illustration. And it would be fantastic if someday we will have something like font family poetic and you would hear balls, 2 connected balls, a blue ball, a blue ball, a red ball. That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? Okay, so this is why I love the web. So we can create stuff that can be used by everybody. But it also means there are some things that make it complicated. But also we can do fantastic things. So the thing I found fascinating is, well, there are 2 things fascinating in this image. That is that students nowadays can afford very expensive computers. I'm not sure where they get their money from. Back in my time, we had to spend all the little money that we have on, well, alcohol and drugs, basically. But what we see here, it's those mirrors on the wall. Those are common screen sizes back in 2011. Now, if we would recreate this work of art today, this whole venue would be covered in all different mirrors of all different sizes, right? We have so many different screen sizes, and this means that we can create things that work, that are optimized for all these different screen sizes. And we call that responsive web design, and that's a very good thing, and we have media queries to help us do that. So this is the website again that I created. And now if we say we have a smaller screen, we can simply change the layout of the illustration. And I did this by using media queries, which is a fantastic technology, but it's also a lot of work. And I, to be honest, don't like working. I became a teacher for a reason, right? So we can do this, and the way I did this, I used position absolute to create this, this illustration. So I absolutely positioned every single circle onto a virtual grid. And then I added a media query, and I did that again. And then while I was creating this animation to show you, I thought, fuck it, you get the point, right? This is a lot of work. I don't want to finish this illustration. It's too much work. It would be great if we had some sort of a system that does this for us, that I just tell the computer, behave, and that it behaves. That would be fantastic. That's my goal in life. And it turns out we've been having that since 1969, something like that. Very old technology, float. So if I chose to use floats instead of position absolute, there you have it. The thing just does what it is supposed to do. Well, maybe not as beautiful, but it does it. And this is fantastic, right? But Vasilis, I hear you say, our websites don't look like circles. There's no use for this, what you're talking about. And I say, okay, but this can be used, for instance, on a weblog. So the homepage of a weblog is basically a list of articles. Not always, but that's an okay thing to do. Now, if you use floats, it looks like this, right? On a wider screen. The articles just go one next to each other, except that everybody knows that if you use floats, it looks like this, because the things bump up to each other, and it doesn't look like this. Now, we can see this as a problem, and this is usually seen as a problem, but I see this actually as active white space. Right? Now, instead of coming up with active whitespace ourselves, which is pretty hard to do, I know, I tell my students all the time, you need active whitespace. Just use floats, right? So much easier. Looks good. and you let the computer do the work for you as well. And that's really something that we should start to understand, that we have computers that should make life easier. We can go home earlier, right? Enjoy ourselves. Okay, but if you really need to, instead of floats, you can of course use display inline block, and you get this Swiss layout. Now, there is this thing about Switzerland. People think that the web was invented in Switzerland. Here you see Switzerland, and that is the rest of the world. It was actually invented in the rest of the world, which is more chaotic. So I advise you to start using things like mix blend mode to make more nice and appealing designs, and use a bit of more color than the Swiss layout. We really don't need Swiss-only design. The web is for everyone. Okay, another technique we can use is columns. So floats, very old, columns, a bit less old, but pretty old as well. I use columns a lot for long lists of things. And this is an ever-growing list of things. So a few years ago, I decided to let my computer generate works of art every evening for me. So it has been doing that for years now. And books, it generates books as well. So I've probably written the most books in the world. So there's, well, my computer wrote them, but my name is on it. It's about 4,000, 5,000 now, and it's ever growing. And these books are published onto a website, and you can download them or buy them. And of course, this list is ever growing. It's a very, very big list. And a nice way, I think, to present that is to use columns. So on a small screen, you use one column, and then when the screen gets wider, you use two columns, and when it gets even wider, you use three columns, right? That works. Now, the way to do this, or one way to do this, is to use media queries. You say, when the screen gets wider than 30M, display this list in two columns. When the screen gets wider than 45 AM, use three columns. But now, what happens when the screen gets even wider, right? When we get 4 columns or 5 columns. What should it look like then? Should we just keep adding media queries and media queries? This is exactly what I don't want to do. Remember, I am a bit of a lazy person. I want the computer to come up with this. And it turns out that multi-column layout has this fantastic feature that you can just tell it to behave like you want it to behave. You can tell it to that the column should never be wider, never be smaller than 15M, and it just solves it. And this works on screens that you cannot even test on bigger screens than we can imagine. So we don't have to add all these media queries. I really like this. Now, you've heard me talking about being lazy, right? And I have to explain a little bit where this comes from. So about 20 years ago, I used to work as a runner here in the movie industry in Amsterdam. And as a runner, you wake up early in the morning, you pick up the crew, bring them to the film set, and then they start shooting. And while they're shooting, you're running errands all day long. And then after the crew is done, you bring them back home. And then you go home and sleep the few hours that are left. So these are really long working days, 18 hours often. And it's usual to work about 6 days a week. And the weird thing is that when you're in an environment like that, it becomes normal to work hard, which I think is weird in itself. But okay, and then you start bragging about it. So the crew used to come together and we'd say, oh, we work so hard and that's good, that's so cool. So it becomes normal. And then there was a small break. I flew to Greece. I went to my uncle, Yannis, fantastic guy, one of the most creative people I know. He's a fantastic musician. And we used to spend all my summer holidays together. And we basically did nothing all summer long and really, really enjoyed ourselves. The thing is, I came to his house and I said, Yannis, listen to me. I have this fantastic job where I work 18 hours a day and I work 6 days a week. And he said, what? What did I teach you all these years? You're a disgrace to the family. You should be ashamed of yourself. And of course, he's right, right? So now you know where this comes from. Okay, back to multi-column layout. I use multi-column layout a lot for pictures. So this is my, since I became a teacher, I have some spare time every now and then. And this gives me the opportunity to create stuff for myself. So I created this photo blog. And I use multi-column layout to do that. So it just works on whatever screen size I want. Right? I think that's actually really, really nice. The nice thing also about using multi-column layout is that it doesn't go left to right, and so that older pictures usually just disappear, right? They just end up somewhere there below the fold, and we forget them forever. But the good thing about multi-column layout is that old images every now and then come back to the top. And I really like that. It adds a bit of serendipity to our designs, a little extra chaos on the already chaotic web, which I think is something we should be doing a lot. I like that. But Vasilis, I hear you say, multi-column layout doesn't work with articles, right? And you're right. If you have a long article and you read the first column and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you're now right here, and then you have to scroll all the way back to the top of the second column and start reading again. That just simply doesn't work. And it's true, that doesn't work. This is terrible UX. You don't want to do this to your visitors. Now, what could work if somehow we got our users to scroll left to right instead of top to bottom? Then it could work. Now you can simply read every single column. This could work. And it's pretty easy to get it done as well. This is all the code you need. The viewport, the article should be 100% of the height of the viewport, and the column should never be smaller than 20 em. This is it, it works, and you get exactly what I did there. The problem, of course, is that when you get to the end of the third column, you think the article is done. How do you know there's much more over there? Now, of course, we can add all these blinking arrows or other UI cruft to tell them, hey, there's more over there, blink, 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 go there. But I think there's an easier solution. Wouldn't it be nice if we simply always cut off the last column? Now people will know there's more over there, and they will try to get there. And the browser gives you the opportunity to get there. So this could work. Now let me try to explain how I think multi-column works, what the browser does. So I can try to explain why this works. So what I think a browser does, it says, okay, I have this article, it's 70 em wide, and I have all this content that I have to fit in there, and it has to be put in there in as many columns as possible. Let's try 4. And then it puts 4 in, then starts calculating and said, oh damn, my human told me it should be not less than 20 em, so this is not good. Let's try 3. Ah, yes, 3 works, great. And then it will simply repeat the width of the column outside of the viewport. Now, the way to get this, to make sure that the last column is always cut off, you can, for instance, tell the article to be 75% of the width of the viewport. And now, when we add multiple columns, 3 won't fit now, and the computer will say, okay, I'll just put in 2, and then it will repeat that thing, and it will go on forever. And the reason why this works is, of course, because CSS is awesome, right? And it has this overflow thing that is visible by default, which drives every new web designer crazy, but is actually a fantastic feature. And before, okay, the Dutch people will be a bit distracted now by the content of this thing, but it doesn't matter because the Dutch people know this website. This technique is actually used by a very good Dutch startup called Blendel, and they sell newspaper articles, and they want these newspaper articles to look newspapery. So they lay it out in multiple columns. And they use this same technique. They didn't add any useless user interface items to tell the people, go scroll to the right. No, they just simply showed, they cut off the last column. So that works. It works in reality. It's not just a fantasy of somebody who doesn't work. Okay, so these are 2 ways to do responsive layouts without using any media queries. There's also another thing that sometimes you want to change a layout on demand. So one of the other works of art, actually what my series of works of art started with, was this thing. Well, I didn't understand color. I still don't really understand it, that's why I wear black. But I decided to let my computer generate random colored rectangles on random colored backgrounds every day. And then every morning I would look at this thing and I thought, well, if I do that long enough, maybe I start understanding a bit or two about color combinations. Not sure if it worked. It has been going on for years now, so this is a very, very long web page. It's ever growing. Now, this is one possible layout, to put everything in one single column. Another possible layout would be to put it in multiple columns. Now, I could write, of course, a JavaScript or a PHP script to create an alternative layout, but I'm a CSS guy. So I thought, is there something I can abuse for that? And yes, you can. You can use the target selector. You can use that. You probably all know the target selector, but you can use it to style something with an ID. And you do that by the, well, a hash. What is it? Exactly, yeah, the fragment identifier. And you can use it to style the HTML element. I didn't know that. I tested it, and it works. You can use it. So now we can, by targeting the HTML element, we can say, I want a body within a targeted HTML element to have multiple columns. And this works, and we have this layout. Looks good, works, fantastic. But there's other possibilities as well. So maybe I want all the images together at once in the complete viewport. Now, of course, I can use a different ID, but I couldn't put that on the HTML element, right? Because it already has an ID. What element can I abuse for this thing? Well, of course, we have the body. So now we can say, if the body is targeted directly, do this Flexbox and viewport relative unit magic, and this is what we get to see, which is great. Now, as you might have seen, below every image, there's a caption. Now, you shouldn't think that every morning I wake up and write this caption. This is done by a computer as well, of course. It says, it really describes the image. It says an unsaturated, very dark indigo rectangle of average width and rather high on a rather saturated dark cyan background. So I created a script that translates HSL color to human readable text, which is pretty easy. I mean, I'm really not a developer, so I could do this. And I thought it was, well, it's in one way, it's a bit funny, right? To make something that's this abstract, to make it readable. But it's also, I think, it is the principle of the web, that the things you put onto the web should be accessible. Everybody should be able to read it. And last year I was lucky enough to meet Leonie in Zurich, and I asked her, does this even make sense for blind people, right? And she said, well, not to everybody, but there's many different kinds of blind people. And for her, for instance, who has memory of color, it definitely makes sense. It also makes sense for colorblind people. I used to have a colorblind art director who insisted on creating every single color palette that we used, which turned out that we had a very specific style at our agency. But he could use such a script, of course, to describe what he designed to clients. Would have been handy. Would have saved us a few embarrassing moments. I can imagine that the minimalists among you don't want to see this multicolor layout and just show us only the captions. Now we would need a third ID, of course, right? And we can use another ID to make this text-only version of the layout, but what can we use, right? We already used the HTML element. We already used the body element. Now, should we add a wrapper div? I don't want to add a wrapper div, they're so ugly. It turns out you can abuse the head for this. Yes, you can use the head to style things in the body. And you do that with this fantastic thing. So don't display any SVG that's inside a body that's a sibling of a targeted head. Isn't that fantastic, right? So there's something, maybe something useful in here. Not sure if you should use this in production websites, but then it looks like this. So, are you minimalists happy now? Let's go back to color. And let's go back to Flexbox. Flexbox is fantastic, and Flexbox is even more fantastic in combination with viewport relative units. And I think that Flexbox, there are some things with Flexbox and viewport relative units that we don't even know we can do yet. And maybe I can show you a few of those things. So when I heard about mixed blend mode, I decided to redesign my site and use it. And then it looked like this. Colored rectangles, of course, randomly colored. It's not that I came up with this color scheme. My computer does that for me. And the way that I did this is very easy. It's just but the most important thing here is that I put a font size of 1.5 M, so it's always readable. Now the thing, when the screen gets smaller, is that things start to disappear here at the bottom, which is not what you want. And it's not really necessary, right? These things can be smaller than that. So I thought, what if I use viewport relative units instead of the famous M? What if I simply used 2% of the viewport width as a font size? Well, that works. And as you can see, the thing now, it shrinks. And this is what I want. It's always within the viewport. The problem, of course, is that on small viewports, it gets really small. And what it basically does, it's text pretending to be an image, and I don't think that's a very good idea. And we can do much better than that. And I would actually advise you never to use this, because if you use viewport relative units to size text, it might get too small, and it completely ignores any setting that the user might have. So don't do that. And while I was playing with this viewport relative units in combination with Flexbox, Vitaly Friedman asked on Twitter, does anybody ever use this function? Which is a very clever function. It is something like a minimum font size. So the size of the text does adjust to the size of the screen, but it will never get too small, and it will listen to the settings of the user, which is, of course, very friendly and a polite thing to do. So that's why you should always be using M, right? So this is what Vitaly asked. And then this guy, Crocodillan, answered, no, I never use that, but I do use this. I said, what? What does this do? I don't know. What is this? And luckily for us, he added a link to show what it does. And what it does, it makes sure that a certain amount of letters will always fit within the viewport. So whatever the viewport ratio or size is, all the text will always be visible. And this is, of course, some insane magic. I don't know how it works. He knows how it works. There's a link to it. You should look it up. It's incredible what that guy, he came up with this. And he even created a page with the maths that explained it. Whoa! People who can do that, that's amazing. So I changed the color a little, the code a little bit, and I put it onto my website. And now I have a responsive website that adjusts to the viewport size and really weird ratios, and it works, and there's no media query needed at all. I think this is fantastic, and this is what we should be, well, what I should be aiming for. I'm not sure if you should be aiming for this. But Vasilis, you say, our websites don't look like brightly colored, random colored rectangles. We have serious businesses to take care of. We have important clients that need important websites. So we make shit like this. To which I say, come on. There's so much nice stuff over there that we haven't even investigated yet. I mean, I haven't even begun about grid layout, right? whoa, what can be done with that? But Flexbox, so many possibilities, and this is what we come up with. An image with letters that say nothing. So boring. So I would really advise you to start using blend modes, of course. Random colors, if possible. Let them be generated by a computer. Computers know how to do that. And investigate the possibilities of Flexbox, of course. Okay, brings us to the last chapter. There's quite a few weird things in here. So one of the other works I created, I was just curious, what does it look like when I put 360 rectangles that go from one color all the way over the color circle back to the same color. And then inside these small rectangles, I put 360 small rectangles that go the other way. Now, it looks like this. It's not very impressive, but I wanted to know what it looks like. Well, this is what it looks like. It's not very interesting, but the interesting thing is this part. I used the Vmax unit to do this. The Vmax unit is 5% of the width or the height of the viewport, whichever is bigger. Now, what this does is that it is actually behaving something like a ratio, a device ratio media query. So now you don't have to add this complex media query with device ratio, which I don't even understand how that works. I mean, what does 2 divided by 1 mean? I don't know. But this I can understand. So I use this Flexbox thing, and you see that the amount of things on the grid change depending on the width or the orientation of the viewport. I think this is very nice. These are one of the things that I think we haven't really investigated, how Flexbox and how viewport units work enough. And then I wondered, what does it look like when I animate this work of art? Well, this is what it looks like when you animate this work of art. In the beginning it's nice, but after a while things start to happen that I didn't really like, right? So it starts up like this, but now the rectangles are getting, well, too thin, if you ask me. This is not what I wanted. And especially now when you go to the next step, there's this big fat rectangle at the bottom, and I don't think this is really imbalanced. This is not what I want. So it turns out you can manipulate this. What if we could do something like this? Okay, 3 looks good, but what if you add a 4th one and it looks like this? Of course, we cannot use media queries to do this because there's no media changing. Right? So what can we use to do this? We could maybe write some very complex JavaScript, but I really don't know how to do that. And if we add more, it will be good if every now and then this would change. And, well, that can be done, and we can use quantity selectors to do that. And they work like this. Of course, these are very ugly, and these are much worse than media queries, right? The media query syntax, that's easy to remember, but this, no way. I cannot remember this. So I copy-paste this every time that I need it. And I will not try to explain what it does. If you want to, there's this link, you can follow it, and Hayden Pickering explains it brilliantly. But what this does is, it says, if there are at least 4 items, use this CSS. And if then there are at least 8 items, use this. And if there are at least 20, use this. And this results in this wonderful animation, which I could just keep this on for the rest of the talk because it looks good. But maybe we should try an experiment. So if you could all please take out your phones or your laptop computers and go to this URL. I really, really hope this works. Live things never go wrong, right? And maybe let's see if we can generate this same. Anybody at this URL yet? And just make your favorite color. You see there are a few sliders. Yes, it works. Yes. Let's see. Oh, your favorite color, right? Favorite color. There are either some colorblind people here. Oh, there's a problem with taste. Do you see here? That thing is fading now. You see that? That's done with quantity selectors as well. So if there are more than 30 things over here, you don't need the URL. I made my point. Okay, thank you very much. It works. This looks good. I need to make a screenshot of that. Okay, that works. Thank you very much. That's nice. But Vasilis, I hear you say that. Our websites don't look like random colored rectangles. We told you before, it's just not what our clients want, right? So then I thought, okay, maybe I can come up with something useful for this technique. For instance, if you're an organizer of a conference, you could use some color on your website. Just saying. And you could use some blend modes as well. And then you could show all the images of all the speakers within the viewport all at once, and all the hosts, right? And if this were a 4-day conference, which I wish it was, because then we would have every speaker do their same talk twice. That would be fantastic. I would really like that. And then I wouldn't have missed yesterday, which I heard was fantastic. Then it would look like this. And as you can see, now all the images are smaller, but they fit within the viewport. And then these are the hosts. They did a fantastic job, right? And the images get much bigger because they do such a great job. And we could filter on all kinds of things, like these are all the speakers, of course, and these are all the women. I think this is actually pretty important. I have to stop here for a minute. I think it's really, really important to have as many women as possible on each conference. And the reason why I say this, I am a lecturer at university, and I see many women, very talented women, who are very good at front-end development, but they say, nah, I'll become a designer, or nah, I'll become a UX designer, whatever that means. And the reason why they do that is because they think it is a man's world. And I think this is a shame. It is a terrible shame. And when I look at all the agencies that I visit, where my students work every now and then, it is true. Yes, there are too many white men, preferably with blue eyes and blonde hair even. It's just really, really not good enough. We have to work hard to fix this, because 50% of my students are women, and when I look at the agencies, it's definitely not 50% who work there. Where does all that talent go? That's terrible. It's really terrible. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So there's a diver amongst us, and we can show that image really big. And if this were a conference about diving, it would look like this. Whoa, that would be fantastic. And look at that one. Isn't that fantastic? All these colorful divers. We would talk about bubbles and fish. These are all the people who spoke yesterday and today, this morning. So if you missed them, that's too bad. This is the one who's talking right now. These are the people who will be talking today. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, I have no questions on Twitter.
Good, good.
So that doesn't say anything about your talk, by the way. So what I did was I wrote a script that randomly takes random tweets and translates those into questions for you.
Good, good. My kind of questions.
What I get out of this talk is the idea of play. None of the stuff you were talking about, I know there are probably people who didn't tweet it, but think we can't use this this stuff in real life. Or, as we had a question for Leonie, how do I convince stakeholders? Right?
Well,
I just want to use blend modes. But how important do you think play is outside of the work we do every day to help break out of the design sameness that you demonstrated here?
Well, I think it's really important at the moment. There's so much to investigate, which we don't investigate. We simply don't do this because everything we have to do has to be useful, right? So there's clients pay money, and if we play instead of work, that's not what they pay for, or at least what we think. So I've been asking the questions why there are not that many artists on the web. It would be good if we had artists who they don't necessarily have to do useful stuff, right? And that would be good, so they could play with the stuff. So, well, maybe I'm an artist, so I play with this stuff for you, so you can use it in your daily practice. But I think it's very important, and I see more and more agencies, they talk about, what's it called? Inventing stuff, what's it called?
Innovating?
Innovating, innovation, of course. And they have this innovation departments or innovation time. And that's a good thing, of course. If you really have room for this and you can play with this stuff, that would be nice. Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about how you gave examples of the same patterns that a lot of designers use. You know, the hero image with the text on top and there's a button there, and really almost like flash intros, only they're not always animated. So you have to click on something or scroll down to actually get to any type of content. Where do you think those type of design patterns that you see all the time come from? Why do we do that?
Well, I think that's, well, it is actually laziness, which I think is a good thing. So it's actually copy-pasting what we see that somehow works, right? And we use things like Bootstrap, which I guess has some very good things in it, but it's also, especially when you use it for layout, you don't investigate, you simply use what's already out there. So it's using the things that we know that works instead of trying to investigate and come up with new stuff, which I think there is room for that, definitely. Nowadays, we should do that more.
And what's a good way to experiment?
Lay in your hammock with your laptop and play, right? That's what I do.
Okay. On that note, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Vasilis.